Let's start off gently at number 10 with Dr. Manhattan and Detachment. The Watchmen by Alan Moore, released in 1986 through 1987, is one of the defining graphic novels out there. A realistic story of pathos, loss, and despair. All of the superheroes are flawed, but Dr. Manhattan proves that a weakness can be a state of mind, and is perhaps only a weakness due to others' lack of ability to perceive it. After John Osterman is vaporized by an intrinsic field experiment, he reforms himself. However, in the process, he becomes something else entirely. A being of near godlike ability who exists outside of time. A state that gradually detaches him further and further from humanity as he slowly forgets what it feels like to be a part of it. This detachment eventually leads to him not being able to be a superhero at all, due to a complete sense of apathy and inability to relate. Killing without feeling and unable to connect to anything, John eventually leaves the Earth behind to explore the universe's possibilities, but states he may return. So if your powers get to a point where you exist beyond morality, well, that's definitely a weakness for a superhero. But for a cosmic being, well, that depends entirely upon your philosophy. Something that is definitely a weakness.
In at number 9, a weak mind. Although ripe with physical powers, it seems as though Captain Marvel's mind is still weak. More often than not, she becomes the subject of a mental or psychological power and is unable to fight it. In one shining example, Marcus, the son of Immortus, was so obsessed with Carol that he brainwashed her into falling in love with him, like some sort of creepy Cupid. He was even able to kidnap Captain Marvel to use the technology from Immortus to see this twisted plan through. Once under his control, this gave birth, literally and physically, to one of the weirdest DC pregnancy scares in comic book history. It didn't stop there either. He then convinced her to leave Earth to live with him in Limbo, and the Avengers just wished them well as they went on their way. They legit did not even try to stop Marcus from taking her to Limbo.
Number 8. Power Girl and Raw Materials. You'd think that being weak to kryptonite would be their only weakness, considering how easy it seemed for people to get their hands on it. But Kara Zor-El from Earth 2 actually had another pretty big weakness at one point. They were vulnerable to unprocessed natural materials such as branches and rocks for a short while. This also includes stone, dirt, and sand. Basically anything that can be found on Earth that isn't man-made. In Peter David's Supergirl Volume 4 number 16, she gets knocked to the ground and impaled by a pretty big tree branch, which in her defense would put anyone on the ground. Supergirl helps yank out the branch, and with this weirdly sociopathic smile on her face, she asked, "What, are you vulnerable to wood?" It took a second, but after she was no longer in pain, she replied, "Worse, to any raw, unprocessed natural materials. So, sticks and stones really can break my bones." God, dumb joke and even dumber weakness. Check her out for yourself in her first appearance in 2011's Flashpoint Volume 2, number 5.
Number 7. A cure for cancer. You're probably wondering how this can be a weakness. Well, let me explain. You see, Deadpool's healing factor doesn't technically cure him of his cancer forever. It keeps coming back, stronger and stronger. But his healing factor keeps creating new ways to heal it. So if a cure was created, his cells would still try to continue and create ways to fight it even if it wasn't there, which if he was cured would not be good. This story has actually been told in the One of Us storyline, where Skrulls began blowing up after acquiring his healing ability.
Number 6. Near complete lack of superpowers. Aside from increased intellect and an apparent immunity to poison in some cases, the Joker is more or less without real superpowers. He's just a crazy dude who likes killing and mayhem. Now, how is this scary? Let me think. Oh, it's scary because if someone in real life had the inclination, the insanity, and the brains, they could do what he does in real life. Minus the laughing gas and whatnot. There. That's what's scary. The Joker's lack of powers makes him that much more realistic, which is scary. Nailed it.
Number 5. Aquaman and dehydration. Aquaman has it rough. People make fun of him all the time, be it for his silly costume and lame powers, which is odd when you think about it. Most of the Earth is his domain, and he has some pretty intense telepathic abilities and great combat skills. Maybe now that he's being played by Jason Momoa, people will stop making fun of him. I know I don't want to fight Jason Momoa, but I will fight Silver Age Aquaman, because in the late 50s, Aquaman had to come into contact with water every hour or he would die. This was a retconned weakness because prior to that, Aquaman could exist indefinitely out of water, and he would be able to do so again in the following decades. But for one brief moment, if you could keep Aquaman in the desert long enough, you would be victorious. It's pretty inconvenient to have to ride around such a handicap, so I can see why this one didn't last. I mean, I guess he could have had a utility belt full of water bottles. Still, it is surprising that some small aspect of this didn't linger. However, who knows, maybe in the future some part of it will come back. It could work if the time frame is less restrictive.
In at number 4, 4. Magic energy. Captain Marvel's main powers are energy absorption, but these powers come full stop at the introduction of magic and magical energy. Her powers are completely ineffective when facing magical heroes or villains and require the assistance of other heroes to help out. Doctor Strange, for example, has helped her out on several occasions, especially when it came to conflicts with the magical Warren Traveler, who was claiming to be a Sorcerer Supreme. Strange would have to intervene to stop his attacks on Captain Marvel, and after he escaped leaving a chain reaction explosion, it would take their powers combined just to contain it. She's not entirely useless when it comes to magic, but it's definitely not her forte.
Number 3. Daredevil and loud noises. Now we all likely know this, but Matt Murdock's loss of vision took away the natural gift of eyesight that we all take for granted and replaced it with echolocation, an uncanny radar sense that allows him to basically see things through sound. Unfortunately for many heroes, their greatest strength can also be their greatest weakness, and such is the case for Daredevil, as his extreme sensitivity to sound can completely incapacitate him. In Daredevil Volume 2 West Case Scenario, he is subjected to a high decibel ultrasound, 120 decibels to be exact, by the dastardly Purple Man, who knows his weapon is excruciating for a man of Daredevil's gift. Daredevil's head spins and he looks like a man under a sorcerer's spell, leaving him completely vulnerable to a follow-up attack. The same can actually be done using intense smells as well, since his sense of smell was also heightened after losing his eyesight. Although Daredevil can and does go toe-to-toe with pretty much anyone in a fight, he will get utterly emasculated by a stink bomb or a supersonic sound. Check out more of Matt Murdock for yourself, starting with his first appearance in 1964's Daredevil number 1.
Loud noises!
Number 2. Muramasa Blade. This blade was originally created for Wolverine. It was created for the sole purpose of giving Logan revenge. This blade has a lot of cool abilities. The biggest one, and the one that is very dangerous for Wade, is that it can take away someone's healing abilities. Wolverine fought Sabretooth while using the sword, and Sabretooth wasn't able to access his healing abilities. So, it would also be able to stop Deadpool's, which would of course be very bad for him. If he didn't end up dying from the injuries he sustained from the blade, his cancer would eventually kill him. This blade is super powerful and is one of the strongest swords in the Marvel Universe.
Number 1. His insanity. This one had to be on here because it is, in my opinion, objectively the scariest thing about the Joker. Not that people with mental illness are insane, you know what I mean. You never know what he's going to do, which is pretty terrifying considering his penchant for, killing. This can be beneficial since it definitely instills fear in his enemies, but sometimes it results in him making decisions against his own self-interests. As I said, he could have killed Batman so many times, but like Dr. Evil, he often makes things way too hard for himself, largely due to his insanity.
In at number 10, split personality. During the beginning of her comic book run, Carol Danvers had a difficult time coming to terms with her new powers and her new identity. Because of this, she developed a sort of split personality between Carol Danvers and her superhero alias of Miss Marvel. After leaving NASA, Carol began working as a writer and editor for Woman magazine, which was an offshoot of the Daily Bugle. However, she would routinely black out and transform into Miss Marvel, costume change and all. It took the help of the extra-dimensional Titan Hecate and the Kree warrior Ronan the Accuser to fix her fragmented mind and realize that she was both Carol and Miss Marvel.
Number 9. Women. This shouldn't come as a big surprise either. Deadpool has always been a ladies' man. In the films, he was in a relationship with Vanessa, who he would do anything for, including going back in time to save her, which we still don't know how that will actually affect the timeline going forward. In the comics, he has been with multiple people, and some of those relationships have gotten him into serious trouble, particularly one with Lady Death, which we will talk about later on this list. And trust me, it's interesting. Number 8, cows. Yes, you heard that right. Deadpool has a fear of cows. Throughout time, Deadpool has been very vocal about this. This obviously doesn't stop him from eating meat, but whenever he sees a cow in person, he tends to freak out. He says that they look like they have no soul and that they are just waiting for you to make one mistake so they can just attack. It's actually kind of funny, and it's been a constant trait of Deadpool's for some time.
Number 8. He alienates possible allies. If you want to bet on a villain winning at all costs, your bet would be pretty safe on the Joker. But if you want to actually join a villain, Joker has proven himself to be a terrible, terrible choice. He's rude, he's annoying, he's at once incredibly childish and insanely violent. He's constantly making plans within plans within plans. He's just a bad teammate. Not only does he treat allies poorly, but he makes it clear time and time again that he will always look out for himself, even at the expense of his allies. I mean, that's pretty common for all villains, but it's especially common for the Joker. it's hard to make strong allies when you turn on them at the drop of a hat, and Joker's lack of true allies often leads to him being overwhelmed. The only silver lining for him is that Batman also has a habit of pissing off his friends, but at least he doesn't straight up kill them. Usually. Why is this scary? Well, it would be pretty scary to have a friend who could spray you with acid at any given moment. Yeah, I think that counts.
Our number 7, Daredevil. Again, is this surprising? Well, it depends on the writer. Matt Murdock's second sight and how powerful it is really varies depending on who is writing him. Is he perfect and untouchable, or flawed and more human? Well, for one arc, the Daredevil's weakness was noise pollution, which for those not in the know is a harmful or annoying level of noise, such as from an airplane or industry. Now the thing with this one is that, well, the Daredevil has lived in a city pretty much his whole life. So the question is, does the noise pollution need to increase? Does it happen when he's in an unfamiliar area? How quickly can he adapt? Are his villains well enough aware of this to really use it against him? Based on how key hearing is to the Daredevil's ability to, well, see, this makes sense in theory, but in practice would need some pretty consistent rules to be an effective weakness. So I guess how rarely it is used or thought of could make it surprising.
In at number 6, memory loss. That's right, from time to time, even Captain Marvel experiences a form of Alzheimer's. As I mentioned, Rogue did some serious damage when she removed her thoughts and memories. Professor X was able for the most part to restore her memories, but unfortunately couldn't get her emotional bonds linked to the memories to come back. This psychological scarring developed a brain lesion when she would use her powers. Every time she took flight, she would lose her memory due to the damage on her brain. Because of this, she would routinely lose her memory and end up joining a new team until it returned. We saw her in the comics joining Starjammers as well as the Guardians of the Galaxy after flying into space to escape Yon Rog.
Number 5, Wonder Woman and being tied up. Superheroes don't come much more kick than Wonder Woman. She's an extremely skilled warrior with enough power to take on the gods and win, and she's shown time and time again that she can hold her own in the world of comic book heroes. However, the Golden Age Wonder Woman was bound by an interesting Amazonian rule that really did not work in her favor. Known as Aphrodite's Law, it states that when an Amazon girl permits a man to chain her bracelets of submission together, she becomes weak as other women in a man-ruled world. This gender-specific weakness lasted from Wonder Woman's debut in 1942 right through to the mid-80s, when DC finally retconned this out for good. This weakness is less literal than metaphorical, meant to demonstrate Marston's argument that women are only vulnerable to men when they choose to be. But still, I am very glad that this was gotten rid of for good. Check out Wonder Woman more for yourself, starting with her first appearance in 1942's All-Star Comics, Volume 1, Number 8.
Number 4, Wolverine. Logan and Wade have a complicated relationship. They constantly fight, and when they fight, it's usually pretty epic. And the thing is, Wolverine isn't just a weakness for Deadpool in the comics, but in the films as well. It seems Wade will never forget how he was portrayed in X-Men Origins Wolverine, and honestly, neither will the fans. I mean, it wasn't really even Deadpool. But luckily, at the end of Deadpool 2, Wade goes back and kills that version of himself, and effectively wipes it out of continuity. In what was one of the craziest post-credit scenes that fans had ever seen. I mean, it was awesome.
Number 3, love of Batman. While Joker's obsession with bats definitely causes some problems for him, I don't think his feelings end at obsession. Joker really does love Batman in his own totally screwed up way. This is one of the Joker's biggest weaknesses since it often causes him to make choices that end up hurting him. In pretty much every altercation between them, Joker could just shoot Batman or blow him up or reveal his secret or anything like that. But he constantly chooses not to take those routes due to the undying and super weird connection he feels with Batman. And let's be real, as scary as it would be to have the Joker be obsessed with you, I think it would be even worse to have him be in love. Like, if someone that messed up loves me, what does that say about me?
Number 2, the Green Lantern again. Yes, but not Hal Jordan. This time we have to go back to the first purple cape-wearing Green Lantern, Alan Scott. Back in the 1940s, when Scott found a green meteor that told him how to construct a ring from its metal, Scott decided to fight crime, first seeking out the criminals who had caused a railway bridge to collapse where he worked. It was here he discovered this magical cosmic ring's one weakness: wood. Ordinary wood. He learns this when he is bludgeoned with a club. His ring could also not affect wood, which in the 1940s would have been a pretty big hindrance. So remember, phenomenal cosmic power can be defeated by going to the hardware store and getting a 2x4. Look, it was the 40s, comics were being pushed out like crazy and the expectations were different. There wasn't always time or demand for some deep backstory as to why a weakness was what it was. Some heroes' first comics don't even have their origins in it. Still, in hindsight, this is pretty hilarious.
Lastly, on our number 1 spot, a sad existence. Perhaps one of her greatest weaknesses stems from that last point. She felt she was unable to seek assistance with her psychological problems because Captain Marvel isn't like most heroes, or even villains for that matter. She has this Kree part to her that's unemotional, but the other half is human, which has flaws all on its own. And when she was with the Avengers, she discovered that her powers were depleting but chose to hide it from them, as well as her drinking. It's a sad existence being both Kree and human that not many beings can relate to. It, however, is exactly what makes Captain Marvel Captain Marvel. The fact that she has this Kree side that is a fighter and the human side that she leads by is an example of two warring personalities in her head. And that has been the
10. Martian Manhunter and fire. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I am also not the biggest fan of fire either, and I would absolutely hate being set on fire for so many reasons. But for such a powerful hero who can shapeshift at a molecular level, change his entire genetic makeup to let him pass through solid objects, withstand ferocious attacks, or bend light waves around his body, it just seems a little silly, right? Not to mention that he comes from Mars, otherwise known as the Red Planet or the Fire Star. So why is this one of his biggest weaknesses? Well, long before Martian Manhunter even existed, a race of aliens known as the Burning caused some serious damage with fire in order to create their offspring, which, needless to say, people weren't too happy about. After the Guardians of the Universe separated the offspring into the White Martians and the Green Martians, they were all imbued with a congenital pyrophobia, aka a fear of fire. So it kind of makes sense why he's so afraid of it. Not only does it physically hurt him, but it also scrambles his most prized weapon of all, his mind. This fear and weakness is so intense that when he's exposed to flame, he has the capacity to self-destruct, either combusting into bits or dissolving into rivers of Martian liquid. Want to know more about the Martian Manhunter? Well then check him out in his first appearance in 1986's Justice League of America, number 255.
Number 9. Bit of a one-trick pony. Now, in the movies, Joker definitely loves to blow stuff up, but in the comics and animated stuff, Joker has a real love of working his shtick into his schemes. Joker is famous for his laughing gas, which causes people to laugh and laugh and laugh until they die, with horrid grins on their face. Now, here's the thing. The laughing gas is definitely a cool gimmick, and it's definitely scary. Not only because the idea of laughing yourself to death sounds pretty freaky, but his victims are always drawn in such a creepy way. But the thing is, most of these plans end up being thwarted with very few casualties. Since the laughing gas can be reversed, people can be healed, Batman can be immunized, any number of things can go wrong and throw a wrench in his plans. If he just went ahead and exploded people, none of that would be an issue. Seriously, at this rate, they should just add laughing gas immunizations to childhood vaccinations in Gotham.
Which is not the case with our number 8. We have Superman and high sonar frequencies. Superman gets a bad rep as being overpowered and lacking in weaknesses, which makes his fights boring. But he actually has a fair few weaknesses, it's just writers rarely exploit them. Of course, kryptonite is so well known it has just become common parlance for any weakness. Another well known one is red sun radiation, which basically weakens him down to a normal human level. But one not everyone thinks of is high frequencies, and it makes a lot of sense. Superman is Superman in many senses of the word. Keyword senses. His are greatly enhanced, especially his hearing. He is able to pick up and distinguish individual heartbeats, so it shouldn't be surprising then that a high-pitched, well-directed noise blast pointed directly at him would prove crippling. Especially when you think about the fact that Jimmy Olsen's watch summons Superman by using a high-pitched frequency that blocks out all other noises briefly. This one is more of an extrapolation and less established firmly in lore, but really it sounds like a lot easier to build this kind of sonar machine than going on a quest for kryptonite, or trying to blot out the sun. But hey, you do you. Someone else who can't stand the noise is
in at number 7, depletion. A big chink in Captain Marvel's powers is what happens when she faces a significant force that causes her to exert a lot of her off-the-charts powers. When she maxes herself out, it can cause her to be put out of commission for a long time. In one example as Binary, she used up all of her power to save the Earth's sun, and when she came back to Earth, her powers were severely depleted, leading to her spending months in the Avengers Mansion to recover. I guess she finally forgave them for just letting her leave the planet with Marcus while under mind control.
Number 6. Human Torch and Asbestos. Now, don't get me wrong, Johnny Storm, aka the Human Torch, is a force to be reckoned with. Not only can he create, absorb, and manipulate fire, which is pretty awesome on its own, but his Nova Flame is hot enough to vaporize the particles of anything in his way, whether it's a bullet, a building, a bad guy, etc. Interestingly enough though, his powers can't seem to penetrate asbestos. Now this doesn't seem like much of a weakness now, given that asbestos is now banned across most of the world, but back when the Human Torch was first created by Stan Lee and Ernest Hart in 1963, it was a much more common thing, as it was used to insulate pipes and wires, soundproof rooms, and even make cheap garden furniture. In Strange Tales number 111, Asbestos Man came into play, dialed up Johnny Storm, and arranged a showdown between the two. The Human Torch wasn't really all that into it, but he agreed nonetheless and showed up completely underprepared. Asbestos Man used his super asbestos suit, a fire retardant shield, and a fisherman's net to go toe to toe with the Human Torch, and he wreaked havoc on the Human Torch until he developed mesothelioma and needed an oxygen tank to stay alive. Moral of the story, kids, is always prepare for anything, and please, don't breathe asbestos. Check out more of the Human Torch's story starting with 1961's Fantastic Four, number 1.
Number 5. Power dampening tech. In Deadpool 2, we were introduced to power dampening collars, which is what they put on mutants as they put them in a special prison. Of course, they put one on Wade. Not only does this block his healing factor, which makes his cancer come back, but it makes him susceptible to just about everything else. The collar technically does kill him near the end of the film. He's wearing it when he gets shot, and ultimately dies. So that little piece of tech is capable of taking down one of the most powerful and ruthless guys in the Marvel Universe. It would also work on a lot of other heroes and villains, which is kind of a scary thought if it ever fell into the wrong hands.
Number 4. Obsessive. If you've consumed any Batman media, you'll know that the Joker is just a wee bit obsessed with Batman. And I mean, fair enough, I guess. If I was a villain and some rich boy dressed up as a bat and stopped me time and time again, I'd probably have my eye on him too. But this obsession is in many cases a weakness for Joker. Just as good guys often have their morality used against them, Joker's obsession with Batman can be used against him. Whether it's used to distract him from something else or to draw him into a trap, Joker's fascination with bats has been his undoing on more than one occasion. And why is it scary? Well, would you want the Joker of all people to be your creepy, obsessed stalker? Nor would I.
3. The Martian Manhunter. The Martian Manhunter is terrifying. His array of powers are just astounding. He can shapeshift, phase, elongate. On top of all this, he's a powerful telepath. He can not only read minds, but also link non-telepaths up using his own telepathy. He can use mind control, astral projection, possession. So why would anyone ever dare go up against him? Well, thankfully, he does have some weaknesses. One key one, that being fire. This weakness has been part of his character for a long time, but it's really inconsistent how much it affects him and when. But currently the most accepted reasonings are that it is a crippling phobia developed after witnessing the death of his race. It was a fear placed there by the Guardians of the Universe in the Trial by Fire storyline, but since the New 52, it just seems to be PTSD. John Jones, the Martian Manhunter himself, feels it's a silly fear to have, and many readers seem to agree. But hey, PTSD is serious business, and your hero has to have a weakness, otherwise it's just not a fair fight. Being able to pick up your opponent's weakness at the gas station though, makes the fight seem a little bit more appealing, but it's still terrible odds. However, your odds get a lot better if you have the required materials to fight our number.
In at number 2, alcoholism. As you can tell from this list already, Miss Marvel has been through a lot of mental trauma, so it's not too surprising that she turned to the bottle to solve her problems. Instead of seeking help for these psychological traumas, she developed a drinking problem. And while with the Avengers team, she even went on missions while drunk. This led to her making simple mistakes that almost resulted in some pretty catastrophic events. Luckily, Iron Man realized that she had a problem and was able to assist her enough to start recovery for her alcoholism. However, upon having to answer for her actions while intoxicated in a formal court-martial by the Avengers, she just quit to avoid punishment.
Number 1. Captain Marvel Jr. and his own name. Poor Freddie Freeman. Out of all of the weaknesses on this list today, he probably drew the shortest straw because his weakness is his own name. If Captain Marvel Jr. tries to introduce himself to a superpowered ally, or for some reason feels the need to say his name in the middle of a battle, he'll instantly be transformed back into Freddie Freeman, a ordinary young lad who relies on a crutch to walk. Or if he speaks his superhero alias aloud in the guise of Freddie Freeman, he'll transform into a shimmering beacon of muscly justice and give himself away. Jerry Ordway tried getting around this flaw during Captain Marvel Jr.'s sporadic appearances in Teen Titans between 1995 and 1998 by having Freeman refer to himself as CM3, since he was one of the 3 members of the Captain Marvel family at the time. Also, he could avoid accidental transformations, but that change didn't really stick around. Honestly, for someone who inspired many of Elvis's onstage looks, that is one weakness that I don't know if I can overlook. Check him out for yourself in his first DC appearance in 1995's The Power of Shazam, number 3.
Number 10. Kids. This one isn't the biggest surprise. Even though Deadpool is a bad it doesn't seem like he cares about anything, he actually does. This is very evident in the film Deadpool 2, where he goes to great lengths to protect Russell, a young mutant in the film. In the film, it's Cable's mission to kill Russell because in the future, where Cable comes from, he is responsible for killing Cable's family. So he decides to time travel and kill Russell in the past. But something gets in his way. And by something, I mean someone. Deadpool, who throughout the film protects Russell and tries to convince everyone to try and let him change. He even sacrifices himself for Russell and dies. But Cable saves him, so it's all good.
In at number 9, we have Heroin, used by Speedy, aka Roy Harper. Not all weaknesses are unrealistic or magical, and not all of them have to come from the outside or from villains. Heroes are just as human as everybody else, as proved in Green Lantern and Green Arrow number 5 when the Green Arrow learned that his ward/sidekick Speedy was on heroin. This team-up series was a 70s attempt to have superheroes tackle some hard-hitting real-world issues, some of which have aged better than others. One thing that stuck was Roy Harper's drug addiction, which was really introduced to prove a point to Green Arrow that not only poverty-stricken kids were drug addicts. So really it wasn't a decision that had to do with his character, but other writers took it and really used it to develop Roy. His struggles came to emphasize that being a sidekick came with its own pressures and pitfalls, and that not everyone could cope with the superhero lifestyle. Roy eventually recovered, but is still in danger of relapsing. His New 52 origin changed him to a recovering alcoholic, and his rebirth backstory is still developing. However, if used correctly, Roy can be an example of the real-life struggles some people have to go through every day.
In at number 8, power loss. Captain Marvel is indeed a powerful superhuman, but that doesn't necessarily mean she's well protected by other superheroes and supervillains. Rogue, for example, completely destroyed her life after hearing a prophecy from a mutant by the name of Destiny that Miss Marvel was going to be responsible for destroying Rogue's life. Attempting to thwart this prophecy, Rogue used her power absorption abilities against Carol at a fight on the Golden Gate Bridge. However, what she didn't expect to happen was that this process would also absorb Captain Marvel's thoughts and memories. This made the loss of Carol Danvers' powers permanent for the foreseeable future. This is a prime example that Captain Marvel is susceptible to other powers that can drain her of her own.
Number 7. Adam Strange and forced deportation. Who knew that archaeologists could also be superheroes? Well, apparently Adam Strange did, because that is exactly what he is. He inadvertently found himself on the planet Ran and was gifted with all the powers of a superhero in Mystery in Space, and it's not exactly explained why. Sounds pretty great, right? I mean, what could possibly be his weakness? Well, it's not actually his fault or in his control. This life of bliss he lives on Ran is frequently interrupted by his rather inconvenient transportations back to Earth, where he has no powers at all. The technology responsible for bringing him to Ran, the Zeta Beam, only allows him to remain there for as long as it's transmitting back to Earth. And as it takes the beam a few good years to reach Strange's home planet, it's not exactly easy to catch a ride back. Strange might have been recruited as Ran's savior, but his timing issues really make this role more of a temporary gig. He could be midway through his heroics before vanishing without a single trace. He even left his wife to nearly get eaten by a tiger once. Luckily, as Alan Moore's Swamp Thing series clarified, the Ranians are more than capable of looking after themselves when Strange isn't around, and thank goodness for that, because I wouldn't be relying on Strange much either. Give his story a read for yourself, starting with 1986's Outsiders, number 6.
Number 6. Kittens. Come on. This is everyone's weakness. Who doesn't love kittens? They're just so cute and you just want to snuggle them. And Deadpool feels the same way. Deadpool has even said on multiple occasions that his ultimate weakness is actually kittens, which actually makes him a lot more relatable in my opinion. Even with all of his powers and abilities, he has a soft spot for kittens. It truly humanizes him in a lot of ways, but if his villains find out, then it would probably be a very easy way to take him down. But knowing Deadpool, he'd find a way to not only take down the villain, but also save the kittens as well.
Number 5. Warped view of humanity. We all know that Joker doesn't have a huge amount of respect for people in general. He pretty much assumes that everyone is screwed up and cutthroat, like less messed up versions of himself. Now, this view often ends up being correct. Particularly in Gotham, we see quite a few examples of humanity's worst. However, Joker's warped cynicism about human nature does go against him at times, like in The Dark Knight when neither ship blows up the other. For all the Joker's scheming and for how well he understands the worst in humanity, he has a massive blind spot when it comes to humanity's strength. What's scary about this weakness? Well, the fact that there are people in real life who share similar views, some of whom use them as an excuse to commit violence. And that is both incredibly disappointing and quite scary.
Moving on to number 4, Captain Marvel, now currently Shazam, and his weakness, saying his own name. Shazam has had a long, complicated legal history with comparisons to Superman and also who has the rights to the Captain Marvel name, a battle which he obviously lost. But his creator's inability to win a lawsuit isn't his only weakness. Young Billy Batson gained his powers from a wizard he met in the subway system so that he could fight humanity's 7 greatest enemies, which were ideas, not actual villains. Things like greed, sloth, and envy. He could access his powers by saying the word Shazam, also the name of the wizard who granted him said powers. Upon saying the magic word, the 10 to 12-year-old, it varied, would transform into the adult Captain Marvel, a superhero with super strength, flight, and a sense of moral duty. Whether or not he kept his childish mind has varied over time, but to turn back into Batson, he also had to yell Shazam. The only thing, the transformation involved him being hit by lightning. He has used this to his advantage by yelling Shazam and then trying to get his opponents underneath the lightning. However, this also means that he can accidentally turn himself back into Billy Batson mid-fight, or other people can make that happen, as occurred in the memorable Justice League Unlimited episode, Clash, which was super awkward because no one knew that he was actually a child. Now there's another lawsuit waiting to happen, but Shazam would probably win that one. Still, having a magic word everyone knows is key to your transformation, probably not the best thing for a well-known superhero. Another superhero whose weakness is pretty well known is our number
In at number 3, possession. Similar to how Captain Marvel has little resistance to brainwashing and mind control, she also cannot fight against possession. When the telepathic being Shadow King possessed her, he also inhabited her body, and while in control he did things like send Captain Marvel to attack Rogue, for which I don't think she'd be too upset over. I'm sure it was already on her to-do list. But her lack of superhuman mental abilities leaves her wide open to become taken control of, and easy prey for those who have extraordinary mental capabilities.
Number 2, Green Lantern and wood. If you're a bit confused, that is totally okay. This is not a weakness that is common across all of the Green Lanterns. It's specific to the very first Green Lantern, Alan Scott. Despite being armed with a magical ring and a spectrum of pretty much limitless powers, Scott seemed to have another fatal weakness other than the color yellow. He first realized that this might be a problem for him after he was hit in the face with a wooden log. And then after a series of wins and victory laps, Scott realized tree bark might be his potential undoing. Put a little more succinctly, items made of wood cannot be lifted or broken by energy from the ring, nor can barriers of emerald energy stop projectiles crafted from wood. Apparently this vulnerability to wood was because the green flame was an incarnation of green growing things, and thus could not be turned against them. Guess you could say he, can't get wood. Check out the first Green Lantern for yourself, starting with 1940s All-American Comics, number 16.
Number 1, himself. Yep, himself. You see, Deadpool has a tendency to be a little bit, how do you say, unstable. He's kind of the cause of a lot of his own problems. He screws over a lot of people, causing them to go after him or the people he cares about. Yes, this is also why a lot of fans love him, but even they would admit that it has caused him a great deal of pain and suffering over the years. Will he ever change? I don't know, probably not, but that's what makes Deadpool, well, Deadpool. But it would be interesting to see how his life would be if he did, if only for a little while.
Number 10, his looks. Let's start this list off with a fairly legit point. Trust me, it all gets much worse from here. The Joker's looks in most iterations are both quite scary and a weakness. While the nature of Joker's deformity varies from version to version, sometimes having his skin be naturally white, while other times having him use makeup, Joker almost always looks like a freaky clown, which makes it a bit difficult for him to go incognito. Plus, it really cuts down on one's choices with the ladies. Now, I should point out that these scary looks are in certain contexts an advantage, since he can scare people, but he's also way easier to spot when he's on the run.
Number 9, the Flash and being too fast. At first, I've gotta say this one confused me so much because that's kind of the Flash's whole thing, right? Well, when it comes to Barry Allen, his speed might be his greatest strength, but being too fast puts his life in mortal danger. In Crisis on Infinite Earths, we see the Flash use his super speed to thwart the Anti-Monitor's evil plan, but the speed vortex he creates to stop the villain's antimatter cannon from firing is so fast that it sweeps the Flash away along with it. He ends up being stranded for 23 years in the Speed Force, you know, that mystical energy field that gives all the speedsters their powers, and spends that whole time running and trying to figure out how to get back. Basically, what happened is that Barry ran way too fast for his body to handle and he atomized himself. Thought to be dead by his closest friends, including Wally West, who took up the Flash mantle in his absence, Barry's apparent death was a huge shock for everyone, and also entirely his own fault. Check out more of the Flash for yourself, starting with his first appearance in 1956's Showcase, number 4.
Number 8, cows. Yes, you heard that right. Deadpool has a fear of cows. Throughout time, Deadpool's been very vocal about this. This obviously doesn't stop him from eating meat, but whenever he sees a cow in person, he tends to freak out. He says that they look like they have no soul and that they are just waiting for you to make one mistake so they can just attack. It's actually kind of funny, and it's been a constant trait of Deadpool's for some time.
Number 7. Abusive. This is pretty similar to alienating, but I think is specific enough to have its own spot. Plus, who am I kidding? I gotta fill up this list. The thing is, even if Joker isn't actively trying to kill you or betray you, he's still an unstable maniac. And this often causes him to lash out at those around him when things don't go his way, be they a minion or Harley Quinn. Kinda reminds me of a certain world leader who shall remain nameless. I consider this to be a weakness not only because lashing out at people around you shows incredibly weak character, but also because, like with the alienation, it often results in allies that are fairly quick to abandon ship when the going gets tough. Joker had Harley pretty damn near brainwashed, and he was still so abusive that she eventually left, leaving him alone. And I mean, as to the scary bit, abusive people are scary. Pretty self-explanatory.
Up next at number 6, the Green Lantern's rings and the color yellow. So for a while, Green Lantern power rings were affected by the color yellow. This was for reasons that have changed over time. First, it was a design flaw, but it was later revealed to be because of an impurity within the central power battery. That was then said to be from the now Fear entity and not just insane Hal Jordan, Parallax. However, this latest update also allowed for the ring bearers to be able to overcome this weakness, rendering it inert. Because, well, most people thought it was silly, and it was. However, it did give us some hilarious panels, like Hal knocking himself out on a yellow billboard, or getting knocked out by a yellow lamp, or more recently in the extremely poorly executed All-Star Batman and Robin having to fight Batman in an entirely yellow painted room, facing a Batman who was also painted yellow, who was drinking lemonade. Ridiculous and hilarious. Something equally funny, at least with the covers they made for it, is our
In at number 5, easily controlled. Marcus brainwashing Carol is the tip of the iceberg compared to what MODOK was able to do. She has zero protection from telepathic or mental powers, and after having a few run-ins with MODOK, it gave him a thirst for vengeance. Again though, he used these powers for superficial means, making her believe that he was handsome and desirable.
Number 4, Gladiator and self-confidence. Cal Arc, aka Gladiator, is arguably one of the most powerful comic book heroes ever, gifted with planet-shattering strength, super speed, heat vision, frost breath, and a few psionic abilities as well. He's a superhero anyone would love to be. However, even though he is loved, he never really learned to love himself, and that is sometimes his biggest downfall. Although low self-esteem isn't exactly fun for anyone, trust me, I know, for Gladiator it's actually a fatal weakness. His power fluctuates according to his confidence, as seen in Dan Abnett's and Andy Lanning's War of Kings crossover in 2009. Get him to doubt himself or even his abilities for 1 second and he can be defeated by opponents with far weaker abilities than him. A prime example of this is shown in War of Kings number 3 when Rocket Raccoon manages to convince Gladiator his gun will hurt himself and despite withstanding far worse in the past, succumbs to self-fulfilling prophecy and is beaten. Give this story a read for yourself starting with 1977's X-Men number 107.
Number 3, Thanos' Curse. Alright, so I mentioned earlier how a woman would cause a lot of problems for Deadpool. Well, here it is. You see, Deadpool started to have feelings for Lady Death, who is famous for being the love of Thanos. And as you can imagine, Thanos wasn't all that happy when he found out that Deadpool and Death had a thing for each other. So he took care of it. Thanos put a curse on him. Classic Thanos. Although the curse was eventually lifted in the Deadpool vs. Thanos series, but suffice to say, I think Wade will think twice before getting on Thanos' bad side again. Wait, who am I kidding? No, he won't. He'll do it again. Like, come on, it's Wade. He just loves getting on people's nerves.
Number 2. Unpredictability. Due to the Joker's unique way of viewing the world and his place in it, his plans often don't make a whole lot of sense. And he seems to enjoy calling audibles whenever he wants. While this unpredictability can be a nightmare to deal with on the good guy's side, it can also mess with his allies, as temporary as they may be. How frustrating would it be to go through this big elaborate plan with the Joker, dealing with all his annoying quirks, only for him to change his mind at the last minute, kill all the henchmen, and then, instead of just killing Batman, he puts him into a funhouse where he plays with him for a while before being defeated. Again! But then again, this unpredictability also causes him to randomly start torturing a person or beating someone to death with a crowbar, which is pretty darn scary.
Which brings us to number 1, Wonder Woman. Okay, before we get into it, this one takes some explaining and isn't in use anymore. However, it is very much of its time, and it honestly still gets a bit of a bad rap. In the 1940s, when Wonder Woman was created, her weakness was specifically having her hands bound together by a man. Wonder Woman comics are notorious for the amount of bondage in these comics, particularly on the covers. Princess Diana is tied up left, right, and center. There were many reasons for this. One was to not scare off young male readers by making her appear too dominant. Another was that the creator believed that bondage was a healthy part of normal human relationships. As for this weakness, it's actually not as sexist as people think. The reason it was male specific was the symbolism. Wonder Woman explains that for an Amazon to permit herself to be chained by a man, she becomes as weak as any other woman in a man-ruled world. If you think about it, it's actually an extremely convoluted attempt to express why a woman should be careful about giving up her agency. It's simplistic and not as nuanced as it could be, but it has more reasoning behind it than a lot of comic book decisions being made at that time, like say, wood. In fact, the creator, William Moulton Marston, created her because he felt there was a void in comics for female superheroes. He wanted to make young girls feel good about being female. His attempts at Wonder Woman's character were based on trying to boost female self-esteem based on the understanding of gender norms of this time. He stated, and I quote, "Not even girls want to be girls so long as our feminine archetype lacks force, strength, and power. Not wanting to be girls, they don't want to be tender, submissive, peace-loving as good women are. Women's strong qualities have become despised because of their weakness. The obvious remedy is to create a feminine character with all of the strength of Superman, plus all of the allure of good and beautiful woman." Yeah, in hindsight, it's pretty silly for one of the strongest beings to be held in place by normal rope. So yes, his execution definitely needed a little work, but it has some solid reasoning behind it for the time. Still, for many, especially out of context, this is one surprising weakness.